Hello, Mystical Stars. This is Erin. I'm really excited to start this new series on how to develop your abilities, your psychic abilities, your healing abilities, and your intuition. And I have a method of doing this that relies on your own unique pattern and imprint. So it's not a cookie cutter system, it's very customizable. So what we're going to start out with, our first lesson is going to be about mysticism, because mysticism is basically the search within for truth. And it does rely on a set of principles, but it is about your knowledge, about you acquiring your own direct mystical experience that informs you about some of the deeper truths of the universe. And it's about a personal relationship with that universe, whatever you want to call it. It's personal to you. So it's not the same as religion. So we are not talking about religion. So let's define what the difference is between religion, New Age, and mysticism. Okay, it's definitely not religion. It could overlap and conceptually in some ways with New Age, but it's distinct. So let's start with religion. Religion has theology, and theology is a set of rules and a set of ideas that define the universe. And the interesting thing about theology is that we find it going back as far back in history as we can look. We see, mythical stories that ancient civilizations had defining gods, goddesses, and a whole kind of cosmology or definition of how things came to be. In religion, Jesus actually literally walked on water. So it's very literal, and it's meant to be factual, at least for the most part. I mean, some people start to branch out from religion into mysticism, and they might start looking at some of these creation stories as allegories or as helpful psychological tools for transformation, but they still might believe in some of the fundamentals of theology. For example, in Christianity, sometimes people will branch out into Christian mysticism, but they still believe in the fundamentals of Christianity, which is that Jesus is God and Jesus came to earth and died for your sins and then was risen and lives again. That's still supposed to be taken as a literal fact that Jesus is your savior. So if you're religious, you have a theology. And then you have dogma. The theology is like the principles of the religion and how you apply it. And dogma is theology that you're absolutely adhering to no matter what. That's kind of my understanding. It's very dogmatic. It's like, you have to believe this. This is the truth. And so religion can lead to radicalization. It can lead to extreme beliefs. And at a certain point, it creates a fracture between your relationship with the world as it is and your relationship with the world as the religion tells you it should be. So in religion, there's also a lot of hierarchy. So it's very structured. And I will say it's also about control. Now, you might say structure isn't necessarily controlling, it's just meant to provide guardrails and guidelines for how to practice. But it becomes controlling because most religions want to suck you in. They want to convert you. Not all, but most. And then once you're in, you have to adhere to all the rules. You have to adhere to the theology. You have to become dogmatic. You have to obey the hierarchy. You have to, practice the structure. And then you feel like if you don't, that something bad will happen to you. So there's usually some kind of punishment or consequence for not obeying in religion. So religion is really not what we're focused on. And a lot of people find comfort in their religion when it asks them to embrace some mysticism, to talk to God. Like, on YouTube, there's a lot of beautiful Christian people, and I like to listen to them. A lot of times it's kind of interesting that there's certain trends. Like, for example, the bullet journal girls are usually Christian, and they like to put Bible quotes in their bullet journals, and they want to remind themselves that God loves them and that God is, paving the way for them. And that's kind of more over here. They're getting more over here, where they're like, my personal relationship with God benefits me. But they kind of want to rely on the religion because it's comforting. So we have religion over here. And it's kind of hard to separate mysticism from religion altogether, because mysticism usually branches out from a religion. So mysticism is about relationship. It's more about relationship than it is about control. You have to surrender control, and you need to be open-minded, because this is about learning directly through your relationship with whatever mystical power that you identify with, which, I think we're all talking about the same thing, but we may qualify it slightly differently or call it something different. So you have to be open-minded, and you need to be dedicated. And this is something that I think where the rift or the disagreement between mystics and religious people is at, was people think if you leave the straight and narrow, if you leave all the structure, you're not going to get anywhere because you have no discipline. But mystics are very dedicated. So they are motivated by their experience, which led them to desire a relationship with a higher power. And they're dedicated to it through intrinsic motivation, not through external pressure. The problem with religion is it forces people to want to conform. I should probably put that on here. There's a lot of conformity expectations in religion. And mysticism is about freedom to an extent, because you kind of decide your own standards. You base your values on an open-minded exploration of truth. So while you have freedom to figure that out, once you realize it, the mystic is dedicated to their path. So the mystic is also principled. And the mystic acts in integrity. So mysticism is about you. It's about how you develop yourself. It's about being responsible for yourself. Religion is often performative and forces conformity and obedience. So they don't really get along very well. There's people out there who can kind of dismiss the harsher aspects of their religion and kind of explore the mystical branch. So you might have, the Sufi Islamic mystics. Then you have the Christian mystics. And you have the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics. Well, the Kabbalah branches out into other practices beyond Judaism. But you kind of get the point. Religions tend to branch out. There's people who are like, I want more. And then they become mystics. And so long as they stay within the core theology, they're usually accepted. Sometimes not. But they are inspired, almost like the religion was their trampoline, and they rebounded off and learned for themselves. So how is New Age different from mysticism and religion? New Age has no guardrails at all. It has none. You can do whatever you want. So there tends to be a focus on ego dissolution. That's the Eastern influence in the New Age. The New Age movement is influenced by Eastern philosophy and by faith-based healing through affirmations, like with Louise Hay and stuff like that. So but you're supposed to be personally powerful in the New Age movement at the same time, which is kind of interesting given there's also an emphasis on ego dissolution. There's a lot of people in the New Age community saying, well, that's ego. I don't believe in ego. You hear a lot of language like that. But at the same time, there's a feeling of I'm in charge of my destiny, and there's a feeling that you can clear your vibration right? In order to be powerful, pure. And the problem that a lot of us have come across in the New Age movement is that people weaponize the ideas, and there's a lot of bypassing happening, and that's because of strong influence on personal power, the strong emphasis, I should say, on personal power. And so people will work really hard to clear their energy field and to say affirmations and try to dissolve their ego so that they can, in a spiritually enlightened, ascended state. But what often happens is the people who feel they are ascended are psychotic. And then they have, on the other side of it, they have all of this shadow stuff. When people claim that they have ascended master status, they're almost always in a state of some other convenient ego trip, when it kind of takes them all the way back over here. So they're not even really breaking ground anymore, and it's become just as dogmatic. North Star Mystic here, we are mystics. We do not have dogma, but we have enough structure to be able to go on this journey, figure it out for yourself without falling into this stuff. So hopefully that's clear. Now I want to talk about the different types of mysticism. So this is really fun. This is my favorite part of this. So we're looking at types of mysticism. I gotta work on my penmanship so that this is more of an ASMR experience. So we're gonna do better. All right, so types of mysticism, we're gonna divide it into 3 types also, 3 sections. We have the type of mysticism that requires a hierarchy. Some mysticism does, and I'll explain that. There's also a type of mysticism that involves ego dissolution. And then there's another type that involves, we should call it circle of life. Lion King style. So, hierarchy refers specifically to a system in which, a mystical system, in which you achieve a relationship with your higher power by surrendering to another force. So, hierarchy is through relationship via surrender. So that requires a hierarchy because you are putting yourself low on purpose so that you can learn. So in Christian mysticism, you are surrendering to Jesus to save you because you're acknowledging, I don't know anything. I'm just a child soul bouncing around here on this planet. And I don't know a lot, but I've had some kind of experience of Jesus, and I believe that Jesus knows how to help. So I surrender to Jesus because he knows how to help me. That would be Christian mysticism here. Where you surrender to Jesus, right? So the Christian mystics, in particular, the desert dwellers, they started creating their communities. I think it was like 300 or 400 AD. People back then, people took Jesus's teachings very literally, and he said, "Give away everything you own, and come follow me. Give away all your possessions. If you can't do that, then don't claim to be my follower." It was very clear. I have this distinct memory when I was a kid where I was taking my religion very seriously. I grew up Mormon. And, Jesus said, give away all that you have to the poor is to know me better, to follow me. And I got $10 for my birthday, and I put it in a tithing envelope as a charitable contribution, and so that it would go to the church's charities. And my parents talked me out of it, and they said, well, it's not meant to be taken that literally, Aaron. Like, they were trying to protect me from the teachings of the religion that they thought was the most important thing for me to learn, which very much confused my young mind. I was the mystic, though. I wasn't just following to follow. I wasn't just conforming to the bare minimum standard that most people held each other to. I looked at Jesus' words and I said, I want to give my possessions to the poor so that I can be closer to Jesus. So I was trying to practice relationship via surrender. And that is the Christian method. So the desert dwellers used to go out into the desert because they took him literally. And he said to leave everything behind. So they did. And they would just go into the desert and they would weave mats out of reeds and sell them so that they could get their bare necessities met. And lived as simply as possible. And their teachings were to simplify as much as you possibly can, meaning the less distraction, the closer you are to God. So one man wrote that he even moved away from some of the reeds because they were too loud when the wind blew them, and it took his focus off of God. Very, very dedicated. And bringing back this page, mystics are dedicated, principled, because it's important to them. Most mystics want to know directly. So we have hierarchy through relationship via surrender to a higher power that is then going to lift you up into knowledge. So you have knowledge through not only surrender, but also submission. Whatever in this pattern, whatever happens to you, you submit to it the best you can and try to learn from it. And, you might in this system have a teacher that helps you, but it's still about your path and your journey. And you get to decide. There's no rule that you have to have a teacher. So this is about relationship and knowledge. And it's about wanting to be a vessel for a higher truth. So I'll put that in there. Vessel for a higher truth. The idea being, as you surrender, you empty out everything within you that isn't divine. That isn't what Jesus was trying to teach one to achieve. And so that's very specific to Christian mysticism, which doesn't necessarily ask you to completely dissolve your ego. It's more about becoming what God created you to become, if that makes sense, in Christian mysticism. So ego dissolution, I put that in a different category because although a lot of what I'm going to mention here could also be a hierarchy, the saving mechanism or the illuminating mechanism isn't the hierarchy. So in Christian mysticism, the whole point, the whole process, the whole system purifies you and lifts you up through your surrender to a higher hierarchy. With ego dissolution, there may be hierarchy in the sense that you might have a guru, because you'll find ego dissolution emphasized in Eastern mystical practices of Advaita Vedanta or Buddhism, where the idea is the saving mechanism isn't the surrender to the higher power. The saving mechanism is the ego dissolution, and they surrender to their guru in order to achieve it. So it's a little bit distinct. So ego dissolution means you kind of merge with, we'll just call it a higher consciousness. You merge or you dissolve. You dissolve your ego. Through, sorry about that, so much for better penmanship. You dissolve your ego through attention to a higher truth. And then it's like that higher truth of the universe dissolves your ego and you become one with it, thus merging with the higher consciousness And usually you will rely on a guru or teacher. Sometimes they're not even physical. They're people who will channel teachers to help you dissolve your ego, which I don't recommend, because I don't think one should teach those things unless they themselves are there. And if they are there, they don't need to channel because they're there. So that gets more into New Age channeling and stuff. I mean, you can channel as a mystic too, but you know, that's when it gets into hierarchy used for control. So when you're a mystic, you might still have some hierarchy if you're a Christian mystic. But you're not doing it for the purpose of avoiding hell or for the purpose of conforming or just being a part of something. You're doing it because of the alchemy. There's an actual process that you can learn, understand, and know what's happening. You're not just taking someone's word for it, like with religion. So with the circle of life, that's indigenous. Okay, this is when you get into the shamans, and that's more earth-based mysticism. And so that is where the point isn't necessarily ego dissolution. The point is harmony. Harmony with life as it is. So when we say as it is, depending on your mindset, you might think, oh, that means I have to embrace suffering. You could say life as it is, meaning, oh, there's a higher reality to life that once I recognize it as it is, I no longer suffer. So there's different ways you can look at that, but they are not obsessed with ego dissolution like in some of the Eastern religions. And they're not asking you to say, I need to make myself low and submit in order to empty myself out, to let God fill my vessel with light. They're not doing that. They're like, no, there is a rhythm and a pulse and a consciousness and a dream happening in life. So there is pulse, there is consciousness, and a dream that is happening, and a story, and it's unfolding at all times. And we can learn through wisdom to listen to the voice of that deep dream of consciousness of which we are participants. So the circle of life combines a little bit of this, but I like this method a lot, the earth-based method, because with ego dissolution, it's easy to become mentally ill, or, you know, the worst case scenario is when somebody believes they've dissolved their ego, but what they've actually done is become a full-blown narcissist, because when you're a narcissist, you don't have to worry about the impact of your decisions, and therefore it feels very freeing, and people think that they have dissolved their ego because they feel free, but really they're just denying everyone else their truth. I'm sure a lot of people watching have seen that happen, or they rely so much on their guru. Like if you've ever read Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, he talks about how when his guru died, he got extremely depressed. And I'm thinking, well, if he's so enlightened, why does he need to rely on his guru? If his guru taught him how to access that higher truth through dissolving his ego, surely his death wouldn't warrant that much self-destruction. Because apparently, according to people in his life, he was breaking all the rules. He was like, philandering with women and like all kinds of things that cause problems. That gets more into the religious territory, because ego dissolution is such a huge goal. It's almost unattainable in most people's minds because we don't know what it means. Like, what does it practically mean? Most people don't know. There's probably a very few, guru figures who have actually achieved it, for sure, achieved that enlightenment. But for most people, they don't know what it means, because it's hard to fathom what it's like not to have a sense of self. And when you start messing with your sense of self, your traumas can come up. You can develop psychological instability and things like that. And it's meant, I believe, here's a problem. So I learned listening to Alan Watts. He helped me understand this because most people don't talk about this anymore, but he went and studied directly with the teachers in the East. And so he learned the reason they have their strict, harsh methods is because they're dealing young men. And those young men may or may not even want to be there. And so they've got to break through their hard heads. And so what happened is those harsh methods came over to the United States, where they turned into control and abuse very quickly. It just didn't work when you switched contexts. So when you're working with, Western people who want ego dissolution rather than stubborn young men who the parents sent them to the ashram to do it, when you have that situation, it's supposed to be gracious, like a rose. You're supposed to gently unfold awakening like a rose. You're not supposed to go into trauma and harshness necessarily. And so if you can follow the ego dissolution path as a path of ever-evolving grace, you got to maintain your autonomy if you're going to do that, in my opinion. And so, but it is a path. You can do that. You can work to dissolve your ego, enter a state of permanent grace, and live life flowing with the voice of a bigger, higher power that is now merged with you as you have surrendered to it. And so there's definitely a little overlap here between that and Christian mysticism, except the Christian mystic doesn't want to necessarily dissolve their ego. They just want to allow their personal relationship with Jesus and God to purify them so that they can live according to the highest principle and the highest good. It's a little different. I like types of mysticism that allow you your autonomy and that allow you your expression, because life is beautiful. And when systems try to quash life in any form for the purpose of some lofty spiritual goal, I'm not sure. In my mind, I don't think it's necessary to do that. It would be like trying to punish a baby for falling their first few steps while they're trying to walk. Like, you want to say, let's go, let's go, let's go. Like, we want to live. We want to have a dynamic, joyful experience of life and to live it fully, but just not, cling too much to our egos. So with this path, this is the earth-based path. It's a little similar to the Christian mysticism in the sense that you want to let something bigger than you work for you and with you. You want to be part of it, but it's more like active participant, like holding hands in a circle, as opposed to going out into a cave and disappearing from life for 3 months and only coming back every 3 days for a bowl of soup, like the desert people would do. So, in addition to these things, we also have a path that I really enjoy that I want to share with you, a mystical path. Well, actually, let's just do 2 more. We're going to call this one Hermetic Kabbalah. And post. Post-Hermetic. I'll explain that in a minute. And then we have your custom version. Your custom path, okay? So the Kabbalah is a set of teachings that we don't 100% know where they originated from, but we know we've lost a lot of information throughout history. For example, with the burning of the Library of Alexandria and things like that. But we know that the teachings started to come together in written form, in a form that was considered fully complete and written and authentic. We see that in Spain. The teachings of the Kabbalah start becoming written and codified at a certain point. There's evidence that it exists all over Europe, even in Africa. And the Jewish people adopted it as a branch of their religion. You have the Jewish Kabbalah. We kind of see it as being a Jewish mystical path. But we have the Hermetic Kabbalah, which is combining the teachings of Thoth or Thoth, some people call them that, from Egypt, who's supposed to be an ancient Egyptian king or slash god, who wrote his thoughts in the Hermetica. And then the Greek people referred to him as Hermes because he was a messenger, right? So we call it the Hermetic Kabbalah, and that emphasizes the parts that came from Egypt. And it's specifically having to do with the Victorian people who created their sacred orders by kind of resurrecting a lot of these teachings and beliefs. And the post-Hermetic speaks to the people who are trying to get past the Victorian interpretations. Like if you think of the Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley, Dion Fortune, and a lot of those, Israel Regardie, a lot of those early Kabbalistic teachers who were part of lodges and things. And they were very hierarchical and very, stodgy, and took themselves very seriously. And they did good things, but they put like a wall up, and they kept certain teachings special and separate. But the thing is, it was all just sort of performative, and it didn't actually refer to true spiritual advancement. And so a lot of them self-destructed from the inside because they were posturing more than they were seeking the authentic mystical path. That's about you, your relationship, and your principles. So they were infighting a lot. And sometimes taking themselves too seriously to the point that it just went right back over here to religion. And so I like R.J. Stewart because he talks about it. He refers to the teachings as the world tree instead of Hermetic Kabbalah. It's the same thing. And it's basically a map to help you understand the levels of creation and how to work within those levels. And you can apply the Kabbalah to almost any other framework or structure. And so that's basically, the main element of the Kabbalah is that world tree that I mentioned. And it can refer to an actual literal tree, like the tree of life, because you find that tree everywhere, in every myth, in every religion, in every creation story. There's always a tree. There's always a tree. Trees are so symbolic. So, the tree in the Kabbalah, just very quickly, it consists of 10 spheres. You've probably seen this before. One of the most amazing concepts I personally have ever had the pleasure of working with. I drew it a little bit long. So up here basically is the heavenly realms in the Kabbalah, and this is the earth realms. And they also call this the crown. The earth is like the crown or the bride of heaven. Like you find a lot of symbolic overlay from, Jewish and Christian teachings here in the Kabbalah, Tree of Life. And you can explore it. It's considered a living glyph, they say. A living glyph that you can use as a framework for almost any other spiritual structure. And so I want to bring this up because this is the heart of the approach that I take here, is that we want to look for patterns and structures on our mystical path. We want to look for patterns and structures that help us understand our relationship with a higher power, or with all that is. And so the Kabbalah lets you do that. It's very much in line with that. It gives you some structure, but it's not a religion, so you don't have to take it all as literal facts. You can just take what resonates and use it. So that brings us to our custom path. Your custom path basically says, well, maybe I am mostly earth-based, but maybe I bring in a little bit of an ascension element from the New Age teaching because I want to understand the full spectrum of energy and which involves moving upward, right, from the earth to the heavens. So then you believe that there is a gradient of energies, but you're not turning it into some kind of power play like with the New Age stuff, where you want to be powerful for power's sake and, you know, become something that you can use as leverage for others. You want to go there because you want to understand. You want a relationship with the divine, and so you want to understand how it works. It's like knowledge is power. It gives you tools. But as a mystic, you listen. So on your custom path, you listen. You listen to what the voice of consciousness, of that higher power, is telling you on your path. And it's going to be very specific, step by step by step. And so as a mystic, you listen. Every step of the way, you listen. And so you might bring in some elements of ascension, like I said, or maybe past lives from the Eastern religions. You might bring in a little bit of Celtic. You might bring in some of your heritage. For me, that's Celtic because I have Celtic heritage. And so you figure out what, these are examples. So you want to ask, what is pulling me in? And listen to what's pulling you in, and then you humbly follow it, and you learn, and you discover and refine. You refine your values, you refine your principles, you refine your practice. You know, like I use a little bit of ego dissolution in my custom practice. You know, when I surrender to my higher power, I try to let go from ego, but I don't fixate on it. So that's kind of the difference. And so like when you look at the Kabbalah, there's all kinds of fun stuff you can do with it to help you in refining. Because you see how the Kabbalah has 3 pillars here, and you can balance out the outside ones. So one side tends to be considered more harsh, one is more easy and light, like this one is called the pillar of severity. And this one's called the pillar of mercy. It's very dramatic. And then you have the middle pillar, which is the balanced. And you see this also reflected a lot in the tarot, which is something I'm really big about, because you can map out all of the major arcana here on the tarot, on the tree of life, to understand kind of the deeper meaning behind it. And what I love too, there's kind of a hidden 11th sphere up there called Doth, and it's about learning how to bridge the gap between knowledge and experience. So it's not a true sphere, but it's a force or a power within the tree. So they kind of usually create a shadow sphere there because it's about bridging the gap. And so when you go up the middle pillar, you have the earth. This is the moon right here. This is, well, it's already got the dot mentioning to represent the sun. The sun, and then you have the stars up here. Earth, moon, sun, and stars. This is kind of the starry expanse right here before you reach the highest level. So I love how it relates you directly back to tangible things. And so that's another piece of the mystical path, is that there's usually something tangible So you're never asked to rely entirely upon theology and dogma and hierarchy to tell you this is what you believe when there's nothing tangible there. And so what I love about the Kabbalah is that you refine your consciousness and expand your awareness through aligning with this middle pillar, with the earth, moon, sun, and stars, to open you up. And then you can actually create a beautiful conduit between the heavenly bodies, and then you can go into the under the earth. You can go, and that brings you more into the earth-based. So I forgot to put something here, and we have the underworld here. The underworld. So you can go up into the ascended dimensions, and you could go in the sort of shamanic style. You can go into the underworld, and you can balance them out. And we're working directly with the energies of Earth. So we are always connecting to something that is here, not something abstract. So the mystical path is also practical. Okay? So on your custom path, you have an alignment that you create. And you create it around your values and principles. And then you practice it. You learn how to practice it every day. So as we continue to explore, I'm going to share with you methods of how to create this custom path and how to practice it and how to develop. Because when you are aligned, when you have balanced out the harsher sides of life with the gentler sides, and you can walk the middle path and align to the actual existing, points of focus, of consciousness that are real, like the moon. Everyone who looks at the moon is in awe, right? We always feel awe. And so it's a reflection, a literal reflection back to us of the light of our higher consciousness that we can access. And but I think the thing that people get the most hung up about when it comes to mystical practice is that in religion, there are guardrails and structures that people tend to view as pointing to something reliable. Whereas when you're a mystic, it's like, well, if it's just a free-for-all, then you have no discipline. And there's no way you can know, as you're just bouncing around and you're just going to be prone to error. I would argue that, that's not true, because the mystic is principled. The mystic checks themselves. The mystic wants to be in right alignment. And it's when people are too in the New Age movement that it becomes a little bit more dogmatic, or on the alternative side, nothing at all. It's just more about having experiences, doing things for the experience, as opposed to doing it because you really want to be oriented in a way that has integrity for you. And I don't want to say it's bad to do New Age stuff. I definitely did, but you'll find that there's not much substance underneath it. Mysticism, there's substance because you have substance. It comes from you. So don't let anyone tell you that you're, lacking discipline if you want to walk a mystic path. So I think that'll be it for now. And if you want to learn more, if you want to start your own custom mystic path, you can follow the link in the description, northstarmysticschool.com. And I have an introductory class that is totally for free that will give you some of the fundamentals to learn how to listen to that inner voice and learn the first few steps on that path of creating your customized path of the mystic. We're not going to talk about Kabbalah. We're not going to talk about different religions. We're just going to talk about a few principles and methods that you can apply. So go ahead and check it out and let me know what you think. And I also love to hear from you down in the comments if you have any questions, thoughts, or perspectives that you'd like to share, because this path is about learning. So I want to learn from you too. So I hope you enjoyed our first lesson here. It was really a delight to share with you, and I will see you